Rach to come and share.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Rachel, and it's my privilege and delight to be sharing with you this morning. I wanted to start by asking you a question. When have you experienced something truly beautiful? When have you experienced something so beautiful it caused you to catch your breath and experience feelings of awe, wonder, gratitude, or delight? Can you think of a time? My family and I, as some of you would know, have just come back from a month in Canada and Ireland. So I feel like we have experiences of beauty to last forever. We have friends in both places, and both places have special meanings to us. And so this was something that we had hoped for, we'd saved for, we'd planned for years. We finally got to go, and I'm so grateful for that and for all the experiences of beauty, more than I can count. We began our time in Canada in Vancouver, and we went on to some beautiful walks. And there were lakes with breathtaking views of mountains behind them. And we walked through forests and over bridges, and we stood on cliff tops and gazed over rocky outcrops. And one day we were walking with a friend, and we stopped to take photos of the stunning scenery around a lake. And our friend, who's been in Canada for the last year or so, jokingly stopped us. "Don't bother," she said. "Don't bother with photos here. You think this is beautiful? This is nothing. Just wait until you get to Banff," which was further on. "And this is nothing compared to what you'll see." This was where she told us not to bother taking photos. This was the garbage heap, apparently, that was just not even worth it. But she was right, because a few days later, we set out on a 6-day road trip that took us from Vancouver through the Canadian Rockies up to Banff and beyond. And Andrew drove, so I was able to sit in the front seat and look out. And the views just got more and more spectacular. There were mountains rising up either side. There were forests. There was wildlife. There were bears and elk and chipmunks and deer. And I began by taking a lot of photos. But then after a while, I stopped. Every corner was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen until we went around the next corner, and then that was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And I stopped taking photos because I couldn't possibly capture the wonder of what I had seen, and I wanted to take it all in. I'm sure you have seen things that are beautiful, that would tick these same boxes for you. But the scenery wasn't the only thing on this trip that caused those same feelings of wonder and gratitude. We travelled to Ireland primarily to spend time with some of our very closest friends. We hadn't seen them for 4 years, and they'd had 2 children in that time. Andrew and I are godparents to their eldest son. And spending time with this family was beautiful, and it made my heart so happy. Because time had passed since we had seen them. There was those feelings of a little bit of apprehension. What if it's awkward? What if it's weird? What if we don't know what to say to each other? But as with all true friendships, as I'm sure many of you know and have experienced, it was like no time had passed at all. Our kids were obviously quite a bit younger when we last saw our friends, but even they slipped right back into the time when we were seeing each other all the time. Truly beautiful things included my son Isaac calling our godson his god brother and adopting him. our kids playing with theirs, reading books, holding hands as we walked along idyllic forest paths. I had the same sense of beauty in the joy of those relationships. And when I saw the delight in my kids' faces with the new experiences, as I had when I saw mountain scenery. We were in Ireland for one Sunday, and on that Sunday, our friends invited us to the final weekend of the final morning of a weekend-long combined churches conference. Their church had been part of a group of churches from the area that had come together to put on a weekend-long festival of people coming together for teaching and games and worship and community and food and hospitality. It was in a field in Ireland, intense. It was muddy. The Sunday was the culmination of that weekend festival, and it poured in the car on the way up. It was the only day of rain that we had. We drove into the muddy field. We trekked through the sopping grass, and we stood and worshipped in a tent with 2,000 people from different churches and different backgrounds. And that was beautiful. The unity and the worship that I was part of on that day brought me to tears. There is beauty in all of these things, and I'm sure you would have your own examples or memories to add to those experiences of beauty. Why do we sense beauty in all of these things? They are all very different examples, and yours would be too. You might have thought of scenery or poetry or words or music or art or the huge variety of life and colour that's found in animals and fish and birds. You might have thought of extraordinary kindness or sacrifice or perseverance. Even movies or even ads sometimes can move us to tears. By the different types of beauty, they show reconciled relationships, extraordinary and selfless acts of kindness or generosity, people coming together. There is so much around us that is beautiful. We are all created to long for and to connect to beauty in whatever form that takes. Beauty is something that both calls us out of ourselves and something that appeals to feelings deep within us. This week we are continuing with our sermon series called Broken Signposts. And this series is based around the book of the same title written by N.T. Wright. And N.T. Wright uses this term, broken signposts, to describe what is inherent within all of us, touch points that are universal to everyone, even across cultures. Things that have been placed in us by God, our Creator, longings or yearnings of the human heart to help us make sense of the world. Like the sense of seeking beauty, these are things about the way we were created that all people feel, hope for, know, and hold as essential to being human. And Wright calls these things signposts because they are universal and they point to something beyond us. But they are also broken signposts because they are never enough in themselves. They are echoes or reflections, and by themselves they are incomplete. So the Broken Signpost book is forming the basis for this series, and we'll be moving through the themes outlined there. And I've drawn on the book for today, but it would be a good resource if you wanted to explore the topics in art that we're looking through in this series any further. And last week here at Broadview, Chris opened the series by looking at the topic of justice, the idea that we all have an inbuilt idea of what justice is like and what should be right and fair. And beauty is the signpost that we are looking at today. The delight in and the resonance and the joy that we find in beauty is a signpost to point us to our God the creator of all that is beautiful. Because beauty at its best should point to God. Scripture tells us, Psalm 19, 1-4, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. This psalm was originally written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew word that we have translated into our English word glory was a word intended to convey the weighty and awesome and stunningly beautiful presence of God. And when we find this word used in other parts of the Bible, it's used to reflect or embody that sense of something greater or more powerful than can be analysed or articulated. The words in this psalm are not only beautiful and poetic themselves, but they also speak to us of a God who cares deeply about beauty. And it's not hard to see. We have a beautifully creative God, a God who made a world with so much beauty in it. But just like the other signposts that we will look at over this series, beauty is not enough in itself. The beauty we encounter is fleeting. The moment passes, leaving us longing for more. There is also so much in this world that is not beautiful because grief and pain and darkness still exist. And sometimes the quest for beauty can be a cover-up or a denial of the reality of the brokenness in our world. In the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, we read the story about God leading his people out of slavery in Egypt. As part of his covenant with them, he instructed them to build a tabernacle. This was a dwelling place, a place that he instructed them to build as a promise, a sign that he would dwell among them, he would live with them. And the instructions for building the tabernacle called for the creation of a work of art and great skill. It was something beautiful that was created to give the people a picture of the glory of God living among them. It was different to the pyramids, so that Israelites had just come out of Egypt and they would have been familiar with the pyramids, which were great stone tombs commanded by the pharaohs as signs of the Pharaoh's greatness. But the tabernacle showed the Israelites that they had a God that would dwell with them, that their God was a God of justice and deliverance and beauty. This was just the beginning. This was an incomplete picture, because true beauty that lasts is only possible in Jesus. And we read about Jesus coming into the world in the book of John. John 1, 1-5. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And then going down to verse 9. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The glory of God, the beauty of who he is revealed in Jesus, Jesus is the revelation of the glory of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory. Further than the beauty of the tabernacle, even more than what the heavens and the earth show us. These are just a glimpse of the Creator. They are not the end of themselves, but a glimpse of the glory of God. Through our delight in and our drive for beauty, we are pointed to God. All that is recognized as beautiful was created by him. And ultimately, we are confronted with the redeeming beauty of redeeming love in the story of Jesus. Just like a beautiful lake in Vancouver, that's nothing compared to Banff. This is just a glimpse of what is to come. Beauty should lead us to Jesus. Jesus came, dwelled among us, and then the Gospel of John goes on to tell the story of Jesus' death and resurrection. In John 20, after the death of Jesus, John tells the story of how Mary Magdalene went to the tomb of Jesus while it was still dark, only to find the stone had been rolled away and the tomb empty. She ran to tell the other disciples, who followed her to the tomb and then left. Let's get a drink. So John 20, 11 to 18. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told him that he had said these things to her. I don't know about you, but I'm particularly captured by the beauty of words, and this is a passage that really, the beauty of those words really resonates with me. It starts with grief and loss of hope and death and confusion. There's people running. Other parts of this chapter talk about the two disciples running and which one of them got there first. And there's the chaos and the early morning light. But as we've just seen, it turns into something truly beautiful. Can you imagine the beauty in the way that Jesus would have said Mary's name? And her delight, her joy, when she finally realized who he was, after all the tears and the grief of the previous days, Jesus was standing in front of her. Jesus came and he met with her in the midst of her grief, of her confusion. This scene shows us Jesus' desire to be with us and the beauty of what he does and how he works through things makes the most ugly of things. A crucifix, cross, a death, a burial in the dirt, beautiful. And the result is that we now use the cross as a symbol of something beautiful, like the big one behind us. N.T. Wright outlines that the biblical story suggests one of the reasons we yearn for beauty is that we are created in the very image of God. The idea of the image is reflection. Just like the pyramids were intended to convey the might and the power of the pharaohs, we have the vocation of reflecting the glory of the Creator into the world. But another broken aspect of this signpost is when we hold this up as the goal in itself rather than reflecting our Creator, when we hold beauty as the goal in itself. A few weeks ago, Andrew and I participated in a panel at a youth group where the youth were invited to ask questions about anything, and we had to do our best to answer them. It was quite intimidating at times, but so many questions from young girls were about the way that they looked. What do I do when I don't like the way that I look? And I really struggled with these questions because there's such a real question with so much behind it. And it's not a reflection on the people asking those questions, but it's a point of sadness for where we are as a culture, that we have such a longing for things to be beautiful that we hold this up as the end in itself. This desire for beauty is so inherent in us that it becomes the standard by which we judge things, leading to be a point of pain or confusion for so many of us, rather than a point of joy of us being made in the image of God and our identity being found as being a reflection of Him. But the encouragement of this signpost is that even as we live in a world that doesn't know God, as we seek to follow Jesus in a world that doesn't know Him, the longing for beauty is something that is universal. Beauty points to a Creator. The longing for and delight in beauty is something that is shared by everyone, whether you know Jesus or not, or the Creator or not. You can recognize beauty in what has been created. And as we seek to share our faith with others, this provides a connection point, a God that created all beautiful things, a connection point to point us to Him. How can we use the beauty around us to lead people to a God who desires to be with us, who is present with us? As we see and experience and wonder at beauty in the world around us, let's let it prompt us to remind us of our Creator who made things beautiful, but as a reflection, a foretaste of who He is and His desire to dwell among us. And the second thing is, even when it seems like there is a lack of beauty in the world, because we still live in a world where pain and grief and darkness are present, God is still working through this. As we saw with Jesus' death and resurrection, something that was so horrible, something that was a loss of hope, Jesus was able to work through that to bring something beautiful out of the dirt in the burial tomb. Jesus came through it to encounter Mary, and Jesus is still working through this. And the other encouragement that we have is the presence of the Holy Spirit living in us. We have the beauty of Jesus placed within, and we are empowered through His Spirit to live out the beauty of Jesus in our lives. The Spirit allows us to live in a way that reflects God's beauty to the world, in a way that humanity yearns for. We can be a signpost through the work of His Spirit in our lives and point to something beyond ourselves.
Thanks, Rach.